Hello, my name is Sally King and I'm the founder and director of Menstrual Matters, which is an online information hub all about menstrual health and how that relates to human rights as well. So this is just a quick video to reassure some of you who are concerned that maybe getting the COVID vaccine could have an impact on their reproductive health, your menstrual health and well-being, or maybe even your fertility. So in short, the good news is no. I mean, it might, in fact, it seems to, for quite a lot of people, disrupt your cycle length, and your sort of regular pattern could be disrupted in some way, including some of the premenstrual symptoms that you experience. But there are no long-lasting effects caused by the vaccination, and this is actually entirely sort of to be expected, knowing what I and other menstrual health people know about menstrual physiology and what happens when you receive the vaccination. These are sort of expected changes, nothing long term, and certainly nothing that's going to impact your fertility. So to explain that a little bit more, most of us aren't taught enough about menstrual physiology, what actually happens to our bodies during the menstrual cycle. At school, we're just given that diagram of the sex hormones changing. That is not the menstrual cycle, that's just the kind of chemical coordination of these physiological processes. It's much more helpful to think of the cycle as being ovulation and some other changes, including a key one called spontaneous decidualization. You don't have to worry about that word. And then menstruation. So these physical changes that happen in our body essentially are inflammatory responses, or they're controlled by inflammatory processes. For instance, to shed the lining of your womb, but then also another inflammatory response stops that bleeding. And people who have bleeding disorders, sometimes they have a problem with that second inflammatory response. So once you understand that the menstrual cycle is itself heavily involved and integrated into the immune system and these inflammatory responses, it makes much more sense as to why a vaccine against a virus could interact with the menstrual cycle. And we don't know the absolute details, we don't know what molecules are involved in particular, but what is likely to be happening is when you receive the vaccine, what vaccines do is they train your immune system to recognize and then be able to deal with and protect you from that virus in the future. But your immune system kind of prioritizes that over these more everyday reproductive inflammatory processes that that women of reproductive age or people of reproductive age go through on a daily basis, and that this can disrupt particularly the length of your cycle, or even the sort of so in my case, when I had the second jab, I was on my period and it seemed to really shorten that period to just 2-3 days instead of the usual 6 or 7 days. And then I had a few weeks of not feeling too great, feeling very bloated, getting very swollen and sore boobs. And then I had a sort of mega period, which nobody wants, but that was just my body trying to get back into its groove, trying to get back into the way that it was working before the jab, and it had just been kind of put out a bit of its cycle from that kind of prioritized immune response. There should be a link below for a bit more information about why we menstruate and what's happening and why it's an inflammatory process, which should help you understand a little bit better why a vaccine could interact with the menstrual cycle. For those of us working in menstrual health, this isn't a surprise that the vaccine could affect cycle length. Of course, most of us receive most vaccines nowadays as children, and so you might not have ever experienced this before, but were we to have got all of these mumps, rubella, and other jabs when we were older, we might well have experienced similar changes in cycle length or disruptions. So that's really nothing to worry about, and these disruptions will take a few cycles to get back to normal, but that's what will happen. The female reproductive system is incredibly resilient, incredibly highly sophisticated, and kind of mind-blowingly amazing the way that it works. It's not a sort of flimsy, vulnerable part of our body. We're pretty hefty, pretty strong and resilient. And the change in cycle length, it can be unnerving, particularly during these times where we're feeling a lot of anxiety and stress because of fears about work and income and relationships and things have been very stressed and difficult. But yeah, you can kind of rely on your body to be fine. And they don't, people have looked into it. There's not any long-term risk or any reproductive health issues caused by these vaccines. Anyway, I hope that's reassured you somewhat. And yes, do read more about menstrual health if you like, just so you feel a bit more comfortable and hopefully a lot more reassured about going to get your jab. That is, of course, because COVID is a very serious virus and it has been fatal in millions of cases around the world. And if not fatal, it can have long-term health implications. It can be very, very serious and quite a traumatizing experience for people. So don't worry about any kind of reproductive changes. That's not something to be concerned about. If you still have concerns about getting the vaccine, I suggest you speak to your GP or somebody else who has medical training, who can explain some of the possible side effects or unusual and more serious side effects if that's concerning you. But this is not something that's likely to be a big problem. It's just going to be perhaps some changes in premenstrual symptoms and the length of your cycle. Anyway, thank you. Bye-bye.